Hello everyone, good to see you all, and welcome to a new section where we're going to talk about the Irish War of Independence, so called. And I'm just going to start today by just talking about, the background to the war and really what happens after Sinn Féin, if you remember, wins this huge electoral mandate. I've got a map here to show you. Here's another way of looking at the mandate, but you can see just how dominant Sinn Féin is in this election of December 1918. Absolutely huge. And of course, okay, they've got the mandate now. The question is, what are they going to do with it? How are they going to turn what's been a lot of radical rhetoric into a workable kind of political, earthly reality? That's the question. And, people, I suppose, begin to thinking now, certainly, what exactly have we voted for? And Sinn Féin, of course, had made very few kind of overt promises. And their manifesto, which is, you can read it there, is, it's full of rhetoric and no real policies, though. There's a lot of talk about freedom and abstractions about liberty and all that. But what does it actually mean now? The only thing you can really say comes out of the Sinn Féin campaign is, people seem to be voting for an advanced form of nationalism, an advanced form of separatism, summed up in this term, the Republic, whatever that means, but the Republic. So separatism, yes, nationalism of a very advanced kind, but what else? Now, we've mentioned the fact, one of the reasons, of course, that Sinn Féin can't be more specific, as it were, can't lay out a series of, economic policies and social policies and so on, because of the heterogeneous nature of the organisation. Because it is this big umbrella, and it has all these different groups under it, and it has old home rulers and socialists and all kinds of people in there. And if you do that, you'll end up alienating one side or another. And the thing is, this will work to an extent, while they're involved in the struggle, because they've got a shared enemy and so on. That's fine. But I say, when they're asked to be more specific, which they will do, of course, when this conflict comes to an end in July 1921, and they have to sit down, they have to negotiate an agreement, a settlement and so on, we'll see the whole thing just fall apart. And we'll end up eventually with civil war. Falls apart in the worst kind of way with civil war. So I say the heterogeneous nature of Sinn Féin is a kind of strength when it's during the campaign, because it can bring so many different types of people and political beliefs under one banner, but it's very much a weakness when it comes to actually creating something concrete and kind of real. Now, what they do, the actual steps they take, the first step is in line with Griffith's very long, if you remember, cherished strategy of abstention. They refuse to take their seats in Westminster, which they've won in this election, and instead they gather together here at the Mansion House in Dublin. A beautiful build. If you're ever in Dublin, you go and see this. Absolutely beautiful proportions and so on, this building. So they gather instead here on the 21st of January 1919, so very shortly after the Christmas break and so on. And this group now, this Sinn Féin group, take the momentous decision to form their own National Assembly in the shape of something they call Dáil Éireann, the Irish Parliament, the Irish Assembly or Gathering, which claims now direct authority over all of Ireland. It's a very strange meeting, this, and I'll just give, here's an image of the interior of this place, and lots of ambiguities in this first meeting of the Dáil. They did send invitations out to all the other elected Irish MPs, so they sent them to unionists and old home rulers, those few that won, to come along. But it's only Sinn Féin members who actually choose to attend. They don't even, most of them just completely ignore it. They don't even refuse to attend. They don't even bother replying. And what makes it even odder is 42 of the new members aren't there. 34 of them are in prison. So it's very peculiar. So the first meeting of the Dáil, which will last only 2 hours, will be attended by something like, I think it's 27 members now who are actually there. So they're all outnumbered by, these are all journalists and the public and so on watching this. There's only actually 27 people there. I'll show you here actually the members that we have. You can see there some notable people in the front row. Collins and Griffith and De Valera and so on. And you'll see Owen McNeill on the front row there, the old chief of staff of the volunteers back in the day. He's in there as well. But that's basically it. So it's very surreal in many ways. It makes it even more surreal is they conduct the whole thing in the Gaelic language because they're nationalists. This is what they have to do. And they're stuttering away because, most of them aren't native Gaelic speakers, of course. Almost all of them aren't. So they're stuttering away. It's very, very strange. But there are a number of significant things done in those 2 hours. The first is the creation of a new Irish government, which has a prime minister now and a cabinet, and is going to be answerable to the Dáil, which will control all legislative and financial functions. So it's a British model. This basically is what they create, the cabinet government, essentially. They also ratify as well some pre-prepared documents, which is how they can get through things so quickly. The first of these is a full declaration of independence. What they're doing is ratifying the Republic as it was declared in 1916. So they're just saying, yes, that was fine. Now, this is a more radical step, you see, than they'd said during the election campaign. What they'd said in the election campaign was that the Republic was the declared aim, but there's going to be a referendum of some kind to decide exactly what type of government people want. Again, that won't happen. So they're going full now for full separatism. This was followed then by something called the Democratic Programme, which was similarly an attempt, it was said, to build on the legacy of 1916 and trying to marry up the rather vague kind of Gaelic ruralism of Patrick Pearse with the socialism of James Connolly. So this democratic programme is at the beginnings of some principles of what's the character of the state going to be economically and socially, what its founding principles. Now, this document had been included, of course, largely to assuage leftist opinion. Because if you remember what had happened, Thomas Johnson, and here he is here, the Labour leader, had abstained in the 19 election. His party had abstained. And they'd been promised this, that the state would be founded on those socialist principles, absolutely, because Connolly's legacy will absolutely be front and centre in this new state. Now, the reality is, of course, that socialism will play virtually no role in the ideologies of this revolution and the regimes that follow it. The fact is, this is a very right-wing revolution. It's a very conservative revolution. And I say socialism is going to upset lots and lots of people. It's going to upset the church, obviously. It's going to upset particularly these kind of, let's say, Volkish kind of right-wing nationalists that you've got. It's also, of course, going to upset a lot of the farmers. This idea of creating some kind of, whatever, sharing out the land for, the Irish peasantry. They don't want that. And so socialism will become, far from being, as it were, a centre of this revolution, will become a kind of bogeyman for many people. And I'll show you here. Here's some Cumann na Gael posters. And this is only 5 years after this meeting now. And this will show you how far the memory of Connolly and socialism and all that has been expunged from the revolution. So it's kind of sad in a way. I mean, Johnson himself writes it because they say, yeah, well, you made us that promise, and yeah, you write the democratic programme. But then they get it and they read it and think, oh, yeah, it's all full of socialist stuff and Bolshevik rhetoric and so on, exactly as Connolly would have wanted it. And it goes through many hands then before this meeting, and it's watered down now slowly before eventually it's presented. And what they do is, if you look at Connolly's socialist rhetoric, and, Connolly himself, I've got a quote here from Connolly, yes. You look at his view of, in his many writings, but these kind of quotes scare the life out of the this Sinn Féin elite. So state ownership and control is not necessarily socialism. If it were, then the army, the navy, the police, the judges, the jailers, the informers and the hangman all would be socialist functionaries as they are state officials. But the ownership by the state of all the land and materials for labour, combined with a cooperative control by the workers of such land and materials, would be socialism. So that's his view. He wants proper full state ownership and state socialism and all the land, as I say, all these little prosperous farmers, you remember, who've been created by the British, and they're all doing all right now. These lot of middle class farmers, rather conservative themselves. What's this? What's this going to mean? Tearing up their farms? So, yes, say very, very radical kind of ideas, and there I say Johnson will put those in, but it eventually got rid of. So it's constantly being fiddled with, this document now, right up and a few hours before it's actually promulgated at the Mansion House. And I think symbolic of all this changes. James Connolly's name itself does not appear; it's removed from the document now, and his name is not mentioned during the whole of this meeting at the Dáil. So the whole of this, they don't mention James Connolly. He's just airbrushed out now of this whole thing. They do make Constance Markovits, who of course we mentioned as another one of these socialists, they do make her Minister of Labour in the revolutionary, Dáil government. Although she doesn't really do anything because the war's on, of course. They're just kind of surviving. And that post itself will be abolished by the Free State in 1922. So they get rid of that as well. And, it's so the legacy, I say, the radical social legacy of of 1916 maybe, which if you remember back then, they'd never been that comfortable inviting in all these lefties, but they wanted his men and they wanted all this citizen army and so on. That's absolutely. So this is a very right-wing kind of reactionary. We'll see this with the Civil War and so on. As a state, the church has a far more prominent role in this new state than, the socialists. People do try and reinvigorate the left during the revolution, to no avail. I suppose an example of this, think about it this way. When you think about this, it's broken organisations after the Easter Rising, and they're all in prison and interned and so on. What gets revived? Well, they revive the IRB and the Irish Volunteers. Where's the Irish Citizen Army? We talk about the IRA, and so we don't talk about the Irish Citizen Army. No, not going to do that. They'll play virtually no part in this war at all. So the ideologies and the ideas are sort of sucked out of this to go for a simple, crude form of nationalist separatism, not asking the big question, what's it all for? And you do get this tension in some places where they come to blows. Well, there's this kind of tension between old sort of socialists who joined the movement and more, as it were, hardline traditional conservative nationalists. A great example of this is Peadar O'Donnell. Peadar O'Donnell in Derry City, which has a lot of workers in it, and he forms his own little band of the Citizen Army. He's an old socialist, and they end up kind of fighting the Irish Volunteers. And eventually what happens is O'Donnell himself will throw in his lot with the IRA. He reaches an uneasy truce with them. Again, on these vague promises that, in the future, yes, once we just get rid of the British, get rid of the British and then we'll do this. Freedom first and then we'll do everything else after that. All these, it's all jam tomorrow. Never happens. And eventually, I say, he does end up, bringing his men into the IRA and so on, and becomes very disillusioned when he realises the conservative nature of this movement and the new state and so on that's being created. Here's a quote from Peadar O'Donnell. So there he is. That's Peadar O'Donnell. So you can see, I fought in the wrong war. We have replaced one form of tyranny with another, and we are supposed to think the latter one better because it talks with an Irish accent. They have done nothing but thicken the defences of capitalism. Our republic will only be achieved through a struggle which uproots capitalism on its way. So there you go. So there's the disillusion you can see there. And I say Peadar O'Donnell is a great example of that. I say the Democratic programme excludes the name of Connolly, but it includes the name of Pearse. So Pearse is brought in now as somehow the great social reformer and social radical, which is very strange. And what you get in Ireland is this kind of strand of, say, of socialism is, it kind of morphs now into this kind of conservative Gaelic agrarianism rather than state socialism. And I say independent Ireland, very authoritarian, very conservative. Someone like Kevin O'Higgins, for example, you can see what he says. Kevin O'Higgins, who's later Minister of Justice under the Irish Free State, we'll talk about him. He's a very authoritarian figure. We'll talk about him during the Civil War. Pretty dreadful, allowing all these atrocities and executions and so on. He himself will pay with his own life. He'll be shot dead by the IRA in 1927 in revenge for how the cruelties he meted out on the IRA during the Civil War. But you can see, most conservative revolution has ever been. And I say you get echoes of this right throughout this period. This is what happens to socialism, the socialist strand, I suppose, within Irish nationalism. It's turned into this, I say, rather Volkish kind of rural conservatism. Here's De Valera, for example, is it? A quote from De Valera, probably 1943. There is De Valera. He looks very happy to be wearing that headdress, doesn't he? He probably liked that because he liked being called the chief. It's probably, but anyway, there he is. But this is what he says in 1943. This is what I mean about this kind of the mawkish kind of romantic nationalism. The ideal Ireland that we would have, the Ireland that we dreamed of, would be the home of a people who valued material wealth only as a basis for right living, of a people who, satisfied with frugal comfort, devoted their leisure to the things of the spirit. A land whose countryside would be bright with cosy homesteads, whose fields and villages would be joyous with the sounds of industry, with the romping of sturdy children and the laughter of comely maidens. It's great. It's almost like it's the Shire or something in The Hobbit. This is really his kind of idea of this idealized ruralism that you get. So I say that's kind of where socialism goes. That's how it's kind of tamed and turned into that kind of image. A great example of this, if you've ever seen the film The Quiet Man, which is one of these films, this ridiculous, over-the-top, idealised version of an island that never exists and never had existed. It's lovely, and everyone's lovely and kind, and the sun's always shining, and it's prosperous, and there's a lovely sense of community, and everyone's nice to the priests there, and we're all nice to Protestants, and it's all lovely. It's just, fantasy land. But if you look at something like that, I'll give you an example of that. I don't know if you know this, but that film, John Ford's film, was actually had Ernie O'Malley, the IRA leader, as one of his advisors. So he sells him all this guff about Ireland, about this imagined ideal Ireland. Doesn't exist at all. But that kind of image is so powerful in people's imaginations. Here's a nice cartoon from the Manchester Guardian, actually. You get romance and reality. Yeah, all the romance of Ireland and so on. In the 1950s, you get in The Quiet Man. The reality is, grinding poverty. It's dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. No infrastructure and so on. But I say that's where socialism goes. And that's how socialism disappears. Now, the church is very happy about that, of course, and they stay on board. So they choose their side, and they choose the right-wing side in that sense. Thirdly now, so we mentioned the democratic programme. The third thing they do is a more pragmatic political initiative. And that is to send now people to the Paris Peace Conference that's coming up. And this is announced, I think, only 3 days before the meeting of the Dáil. There's going to be this Paris Peace Conference. This is you send over delegates to Versailles. I mean, everyone's sending delegates to Versailles. Every single national ethnic group from around the world, they're all going. No one's listening to them, because the people who are going to be punished, of course, are going to be the losers in the war. The British aren't going to. They won the war. Why would they give in to national self-determination and so on? But it's an idea, I suppose. That along with abstention is the one major sort of political initiative they have. Sinn Féin. And I say they head off to Paris, and this ultimately kind of futile kind of idea. Now, you do have a sense with this. I mean, this kind of thing, I think, it's quite clever in many ways, because I think they know they're going to fail. But I think it's an appeal really aimed to resonate less in Paris, but more in Irish America. Because the Americans obviously very prominent there. Woodrow Wilson, his 14 points and so on. And Irish America will always be very important in terms of, other exile groups in Britain as well are important in terms of supplying funding, particularly. And we'll see during the War of Independence, De Valera will spend most of his time in America. He raised lots of money and lots of awareness, desperately trying to get political recognition for this Irish Republic, which he won't get. But yeah, that's an important audience they're thinking about, I think, with this. Now, what they do as well, what they're going to concentrate on, particularly Sinn Féin, is, because they haven't really got any policies, aside from these kind of, statement kind of separatism. And what they end up doing is they concentrate on a whole mass of propaganda, saturation propaganda now. They create a whole web of kind of grandiosely titled embassies and officials and ambassadors and all this kind of nonsense in numerous countries. But their role isn't really to act as ambassadors or anything like that. It's basically just to disseminate now the Sinn Féin propaganda message. And this propaganda particularly is carried out by Erskine Childers. And, Childers himself, again, we'll talk about the fate of Childers, which you can see hinted at there. But Childers himself, as this great writer, is a brilliant propagandist. One of the reasons they kill him, actually, in 1922, because he joins the anti-treaty side of the movement, and he turns his genius of propaganda against the pro-treaty Dublin government. They don't want that at all. But yeah, they publish all this stuff, lots of pamphlets and speeches and newsreels and things like that. That's where all the money's going. And it's translating into numerous languages, and is really by far the most successful enterprise engaged in by Irish Republicans. It is pretty incredible. And I said, De Valera goes over there. He raises like £6 million or something. Remarkable. But that's going to be ploughed back into the propaganda message. All these kind of stories. And some people have referred to what this war have referred to it that we're talking about, have referred to it as essentially armed propaganda. That's what we have. It is a kind of mix of the two. A lot of this propaganda stuff, but let's say with military initiative as well, sort of tacked onto it. Now, what's ironic about all this? And as I say, one thing that people are not voted for is war. That's not been in the message at all. There's going to be another rising or something. No one's ever mentioned that. Everyone talks about the martyrs of 1916 and how terrible and sad it all is, but no one really has voted for war at all. And what happens is, one of the strangest coincidences in all of modern Irish history is on exactly the same day the Dáil sits, we have an incident takes place here in South Tipperary, a place called Sollaheadbeg. You can see it there. There it is on the map. Where a group of radical Irish volunteers now, under the command of a man called Dan Breen, and I'll show you, here's Dan Breen, who writes a famous book, you may have read it, about his time in the War of Fight for Irish Freedom, I think he writes. And Sean Tracy, another one of his mates. They shoot dead 2 RIC men who were escorting a commercial sort of cart of commercial gelignite, for mining and stuff, in what appears to be a botched attempt to steal weapons now. And they've been planning this for a long time. The attack itself, a lot of it has to do with, it's kind of incompetence mixed with frustration, I think. And has no sanction from the volunteer leadership at all. All the political leadership, they just do this as well. Again, I'll show you here. Here's the reward here. And this coincidence of these timing of these two events now, which are not linked, I say, in any direct way, is what leads historians now to declare that date, the 21st of January 1919, as the first day of the Irish War of Independence. And I say, we'll talk about that when we talk next time about the war itself and the character of this war. And it's a very convenient start date. It's perfect, really, but does it really reflect reality in terms of this conflict? But the trouble is now, this this is going to happen. There's going to be the military side of the movement are going to now trying to seize back, as it were, the initiative. So all these politicians are meeting and stuff, and the military side are getting very frustrated, as they have been. You know, where's the rising? You know, we're militarists. We're waiting now to avenge 1916, and we've waited, and we've backed Sinn Féin in the by-elections, and we've kept our mouths shut, and we keep waiting and waiting, and then you get this. Yeah, this, I say, the political side taking over. Hang on a minute. You know, this is our revolution. It's a military revolution. We did this. And now this is, I say, this frustration. They're going to seize back this control of this. And we'll see certainly during this War of Independence that it's the military side of the movement, and certainly not the political side of the movement, who are now going to be shaping events kind of going forward. So I say that's just a little introduction to get us up to the start of this so-called War of Independence, and we'll explore all that in subsequent lectures to come. Okay, everyone, I'll see you soon. Thanks.